Was always aware that I was my family's second-best child. Neither of my parents ever said it out loud. They were not obliged to. Their deeds were more powerful than words. Mike, my brother, was their heir apparent, their eldest child, their excitement and pride. They thought he couldn't do anything wrong because he was 2 years older than me. He damaged Mom's favorite vase while playing baseball in the house when we were youngsters, I recall. Mom simply grinned and said, "Boys will be boys," rather than reprimanding him. "Honey, at least you're working on your swing." A week later, however, things were completely different when I unintentionally spilled juice on the carpet. "Irene, how could you be so careless?" I can still hear Mom's voice. "Go get the cleaning supplies right now, and you're grounded for the weekend." My early years were framed by these unfair norms. When Mike received failing grades, our parents would respond, "Well, he's just more focused on sports right now." However, if I had an A- rather than an A+, they would hardly take their eyes off their phones and say, "You could do better if you tried harder." My grandmother was the only one who actually saw me. Her home became my haven, and she lived only a few blocks away. She did swoon over Mike, too. She attended all of his games, brought him cookies, and handled everything. She did, however, take note of my accomplishments. Unlike my parents, year after year the trend persisted. Mike's birthday celebrations were lavish events complete with beautiful cakes, bouncy houses, and scores of friends. My birthdays, my parents, in fact, forgot them completely half the time. I can still recall my 10th birthday. I waited for someone to speak while I sat at the breakfast table. Dad was reading the newspaper as Mom worked on Mike's science project. When I eventually plucked up the nerve to remind them that night, Dad seemed truly shocked. "Oh, I see. Cheers to your birthday, child. Next time we're at the mall, we'll get you something." They didn't. Grandma was the only one who remembered. Every time she visited, she would bring a handcrafted cupcake, a solitary candle, and a tiny gift. Whispering, "Make a wish, my dear," and I felt important for a second. I came to terms with it. To have no expectations. To be taken aback by even the slightest recognition. I gave my studies my all attention. I became a member of every academic club I could locate. I made an effort to separate myself from Mike's shadow. I might as well have been invisible at home, though. Things changed the day Grandma fell ill. Mike was 16 and I was 14. I stayed in the hospital with her every afternoon, working on my schoolwork in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed while she slept. Mike also came, although not as often. He was busy with football practice, and our parents said that was important for his future. One evening, just a few days before she passed away, she called our whole family to her hospital room. Mom, Dad, Mike, and I gathered around her bed. Her voice was weak, but determined as she looked directly at Dad. "Son," she said, gripping his hand, "I want you to promise me something about my inheritance." She paused to catch her breath. "Promise me you'll use it for both of their educations, Mike's and Irene's. Both of them need to go to college." Dad nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom. I promise you right here in front of everyone that your inheritance will go to both Mike's and Irene's education." After Grandma's death, I threw myself into my studies with even more determination. Even though I knew about her inheritance and Dad's promise, I wasn't taking any chances. I wanted to prove that I deserved to go to college on my own merits. My report cards were filled with A's, but nobody at home ever asked to see them. I'd leave them on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would notice. But they'd end up buried under take-out menus and Mike's football schedules. The only person who would have proudly displayed them on her fridge was no longer there to do so. I joined the debate club despite my hands shaking every time I had to speak in public. "Clear your throat less, Irene," my debate coach would say. "You have good arguments. Let them hear them." Gradually, my voice grew stronger. though at home it remained as invisible as ever. I won first place in the state science fair with my project on renewable energy. The local newspaper even ran a small article about it. I left it on Dad's desk, but it disappeared under a stack of papers, unread. Meanwhile, Mike's every football game made it onto our family calendar, marked with bright red circles. Then came Mike's graduation. Suddenly, our normally quiet house transformed into party central. Mom spent weeks planning every detail, from the catering to the decorations. "We're so proud of you, son," Dad announced during the party, clinking his glass for attention. The backyard was packed with relatives, friends, and what seemed like half the neighborhood. Not only has our boy graduated, but he's also heading to Preston University this fall. Mike sat there grinning, keys to his new car dangling from his fingers. I stood in the corner holding a plate of cake I wasn't eating. "Thanks to Mom's inheritance," Dad continued, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been able to secure Mike's future at one of the best colleges in the country. She would have been so proud." The guests erupted in applause and congratulations. 2 months later, we drove Mike to Preston University, 6 states away. Mom and Dad helped him move into his dorm, took hundreds of pictures, and spent 2 extra days in town just to make sure he was settled and okay. After that, our house became Mike's satellite campus. Mom and Dad called him every day, sometimes putting him on speaker so his voice would fill the kitchen during dinner. They drove up to visit him at least twice a month, always returning with stories about his classes, his friends, and his football practice. Meanwhile, I continued my senior year alone in my quiet room. I studied for tests nobody would celebrate. I won competitions nobody would attend. I prepared for a future I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to have. 2 years passed quickly, and I finished high school at the top of my class. Not that anyone at home noticed or cared. On graduation day, I put on my white dress and honor cords alone. My parents had left 3 days earlier for a much-needed vacation with Mike. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," Mom had said casually, as if missing my graduation was as trivial as missing a Tuesday dinner. I sat among my classmates during the ceremony, watching other parents beam and take photos. My friend Jenny's mom even took some pictures of me, saying, "Your parents will want to see these." I didn't have the heart to tell her they probably wouldn't. While my classmates celebrated with their families, I went home and started working on my college applications. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, carefully crafting essays, gathering recommendation letters, and documenting all my academic achievements. The acceptance letters started arriving a week later. Evergreen State University offered me a full scholarship with free dorm accommodations. Their letter praised my academic achievements and extracurricular activities. Then came the acceptance from Blackwood Private College. Their program was exactly what I wanted, though the tuition was steep. Not as expensive as Mike's Preston University, but still substantial. I knew my parents still had my portion of Grandma's inheritance. I'd overheard them discussing money matters enough times to know it was there, waiting, just as Grandma had intended. So I waited for their return, the Blackwood acceptance letter safely tucked away in my desk drawer, the Evergreen offer hidden as my backup plan. They came back tanned and cheerful 2 weeks later. Mike had already headed back to Preston to hang with his brothers, as Dad proudly announced. I waited until after dinner, when they were relaxed and still sharing vacation stories. "I got accepted to Blackwood College," I said during a rare moment of silence. "Their business program is highly ranked." Mom glanced up briefly from her phone. "That's nice, dear." "I'd need to pay tuition," I continued, my heart beating faster. I was hoping we could use my portion of Grandma's inheritance. The silence that followed was different, heavier somehow. Dad sat down his coffee mug, exchanging a look with Mom. "We don't have money for your college tuition," he said flatly. I felt my chest tighten. "But Grandma's inheritance," I said, my voice shaking. She made you promise in front of everyone that it would go to both our educations. Mom had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but Dad just shrugged. We spent that money on our vacation. The rest went to your brother. He needed it more. It was an expensive trip, Mom added, as if that explained everything. And Mike's tuition isn't getting any cheaper. He needs the extra support. I stared at my parents, trying to process what they'd just said. The room felt too small, too hot. You promised her, I said, my voice trembling. Grandma made you promise. We were all there, you, Mom, Mike, me. She made you swear you'd use the money for both our educations. Dad took another sip of his coffee, not even looking at me. I just didn't want to upset my mother in her final days. We knew from the start we wouldn't be giving you any of that money. Something inside me snapped. 18 years of being invisible, of swallowing my words, of accepting their neglect, it all came rushing out at once. You're liars, I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair fell backward. You're nothing but liars who betray your own mother's dying wish. You spent my college money on a vacation. You gave it to Mike, who already had his share. You've been lying to everyone, to Grandma, to me. Get out. Dad's words cut through my tirade like ice. I thought I'd misheard. You heard your father, Mom said, her voice cold. Get out of this house. You're 18 now, an adult. If you're so independent that you can talk to us this way, you can take care of yourself. Before I could respond, Mom grabbed my arm and practically dragged me upstairs to my room. She yanked my old suitcase from under the bed and threw it at my feet. Pack your things, she said, pulling open my drawers. I want you out of here first thing tomorrow morning. I stood there frozen, watching as she pulled out the suitcase's expandable handle. This was really happening. My own parents were throwing me out. Mom, I started to say, but the look she gave me was one I'd never seen before. Like I was a stranger who had invaded her home. That's when it hit me. They were strangers, too. Maybe they always had been. The people I'd been trying to please all these years, hoping for their love and approval, didn't really exist. These were just two people who happened to share my DNA. I packed in silence. Clothes, books, my laptop, the few precious photos I had of Grandma. Mom stood in the doorway watching, arms crossed, as if making sure I wouldn't steal anything. As if there was anything in this house I wanted any more. When my suitcase was full, I took out my phone and texted Jenny. Can I come over? It's important. Her response was immediate. Of course. Doors open. I walked out without saying goodbye. Nobody tried to stop me. Jenny's parents had given her a small apartment for her 18th birthday, just a few blocks away. She was waiting at her door when I arrived. She took one look at my face and my suitcase and pulled me into a hug. That night, as we sat on her couch drinking hot chocolate, I made my decision. I would accept the offer from Evergreen State University. The full scholarship and free dorm would be my ticket to independence, but I needed money for books and living expenses, so I'd have to work first. That summer at Sunnyside Cafe taught me more than just how to make the perfect latte. Between taking orders and balancing trays, I learned what it meant to stand on my own feet. My tips went straight into a savings account, growing dollar by dollar, while my paychecks covered basic necessities. When fall came, I hugged Jenny goodbye and moved into my dorm at Evergreen State. My roommate, Sarah, took one look at my sparse belongings and offered to share her mini fridge. That simple kindness almost made me cry. I found a job at the college library, shelving books and manning the reference desk during evening shifts. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to think about my former life. The library became my sanctuary, quiet, orderly, and predictable. Everything my family life hadn't been. When relatives called, their questions were always strange and probing. Aunt Linda's voice would be full of barely concealed concern. "Do you have somewhere to sleep at night, dear?" Uncle Bob would ask, "Are you getting enough to eat?" I'd answer truthfully that I was fine, wondering what stories they'd been told about my life. Sometimes Jenny would start to tell me news about my family. "Hey, I heard your brother." But I'd cut her off immediately. "I don't want to know," I'd say. And she'd understand. The holidays could have been hard, but Jenny's family wouldn't hear of me spending them alone. That first Christmas at their house, I sat at their dining table surrounded by warmth and genuine affection. Jenny's dad, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after dinner. "Irene," he said, his voice serious but kind, "I've been watching how hard you work. When you graduate, there will be a place for you at Peterson Technologies if you want it." I accepted on the spot, tears threatening to spill over. Finally, someone was noticing my effort, my determination. Graduation came faster than I expected. I stood on stage, accepting my diploma with highest honors, scanning the crowd out of habit. Jenny and her parents were there, cheering loudly enough to drown out the crowd. I didn't look for any other familiar faces. I arrived at Peterson Technologies on my first day there dressed in a suit that I had saved up for at the library. I was managing my own projects in 6 months. By the second year, I had a group of people working for me. Mr. Peterson had good reason to believe in me. I worked more hours than anyone else, poured myself into every challenge, and soon established a reputation for finding solutions to problems that others couldn't. Naturally, there were raises and promotions. Before I knew it, I was making more money than I had ever imagined while I was counting tips at the cafe. I began attending yoga classes, acquired business attire, and accompanied Jenny on trips to destinations I had only read about in magazines. My birthdays shifted from being a reminder of my negligence to becoming a celebration of my accomplishments. Jenny would plan intimate get-togethers with only close coworkers, delicious food, and sincere laughter. No imposed family dynamics. No pretense. No pain. My 27th birthday was approaching, and I had a secret I'd been keeping even from Jenny. For the past 5 years, I'd been saving every extra penny, Christmas bonuses, performance rewards, even the money I would have spent on lunch by bringing sandwiches from home instead of buying from the cafe downstairs. Every dollar went into my special savings account labeled simply Dream. The dream became reality 3 weeks before my birthday. I stood in an empty living room with high ceilings and huge windows, hardwood floors gleaming in the afternoon sun, and signed the papers that made it mine. My own apartment. Not rented. Owned. "Congratulations," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It's all yours." That evening, feeling a bit bold and maybe a little proud, I did something I rarely did. I posted on social media. Just me standing in my empty but beautiful living room, keys dangling from my fingers, unable to contain my smile. The caption read, "Early birthday gift to myself. Dreams do come true when you work hard enough. New home. Birthday gift. Blessed." The likes and comments started pouring in immediately. Jenny's was first, of course. Finally, can't wait for the housewarming party. My colleagues chimed in with their congratulations. Even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years liked the post and left comments like, "So proud of you," and "Happy early birthday." I was sitting at my desk at work a week later, reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly. My mother's voice came through the speaker, sweet as honey and just as sticky. "Irene, sweetheart, I saw your beautiful new apartment on Facebook, and I suddenly remembered your birthday is coming up." Suddenly remembered. After many years of forgetting. "It's wonderful to see you doing so well," she continued, her voice dripping with an enthusiasm I'd never heard directed at me before. "Your father and I have been thinking we should celebrate your birthday properly this year at home. We'll invite the whole family." I almost laughed out loud. "Of course. Years of silence, and now that I had a fancy apartment, suddenly I was worth remembering. Worth celebrating. "We've missed you so much," she added, and I could almost see her practiced, concerned expression through the phone. "It's time for the family to come together again. What do you say?" I should have said no. I should have told her exactly what I thought about her sudden attack of maternal affection. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Sure, Mom. Why not?" As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile, though there was no warmth in it. After all these years, I was curious to see what game they were playing. I pulled up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes, the engine purring softly as I parked. The contrast between my car and the house was stark: peeling paint, missing shingles, and an overgrown lawn. My parents appeared in the doorway before I even reached it. Their eyes locked onto my car first, then shifted to my designer suit and heels. I watched their expressions change, noticing the calculating gleam in their eyes. Iron. Mom rushed forward to hug me, her enthusiasm almost making me step back. "You look expensive." Dad hung back, trying and failing to look casual. They both seemed older than I remembered, more gray hair, deeper wrinkles, shoulders slightly stooped. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The furniture I remembered from my childhood was worn and faded. The carpet was threadbare. And there, sprawled on the couch like he'd never left, was Mike. He gained weight, lost hair, and sat beside a young woman whose pregnant belly strained against her dress. "Hey, sis," he said, not bothering to get up. "Meet Sarah, my wife." Mom quickly jumped in with explanations I hadn't asked for. "Mike's staying with us temporarily. Well, college wasn't quite the right fit. But he's got some promising job prospects. Going on 9 years of temporary, I thought, but kept my face neutral. The guests will be here soon," Dad said, gesturing to a table laden with food. "But first, tell us about your job. That's quite a car you're driving." "Must be making good money, huh?" "Things are fine," I replied smoothly, sidestepping the question. "The catering looks nice." "But what exactly do you do?" Mom pressed. "That apartment of yours must cost a fortune. And a Mercedes?" I smiled blandly. "I work in management. How's everyone been?" Before they could probe further, the doorbell rang. Suddenly, the house was full of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. They swarmed around me with hugs and exclamations. Aunt Helen pulled me aside during the commotion, her voice low. "I'm so glad you finally came to your senses, dear. Your parents have been so worried. It must have been hard, living like that." I turned to her, confused. "Like what?" She glanced around before whispering, "You know, after you ran away with that boy, living on the streets, refusing to work." She patted my arm. "But look at you now, all cleaned up and respectable again." The pieces clicked into place. While I'd been building my career, earning promotions, and buying my apartment, my parents had been spinning tales about their shameful, runaway daughter. Their version of events painted them as the worried, abandoned parents of a wayward child, and I'd played right into their hands by cutting off contact with the extended family. Once everyone was seated at the table, Dad stood up, raising his glass. "We're here today to celebrate our wonderful daughter," he announced, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We're so proud of what she's become." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, tears I'd seen her practice for school plays decades ago. "The family should stick together," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I kept mine firmly in my lap. That's what matters most, family supporting each other. The word supporting wasn't used subtly. Her glances at my pricey jewelry and luxury watch weren't either. "Your father and I always knew you'd make something of yourself," she added, sniffling. When she was done, I waited for a time in silence. Then I got up and smoothed my dress slowly. I said, "Thank you all for coming," in a calm, clear voice. The fact that my folks noticed my birthday this year is actually rather interesting. Really, it's the first time. The room became silent. Mom's feigned tears quickly dried up. You know, my birthdays were never recognized when I was growing up. Not one. However, I suppose a Mercedes and an apartment in a great area of town make birthdays more special, don't they? Dad cautioned. "Irene, now isn't the time." "Oh, but it is." I turned to speak to everyone at the table. Earlier, Aunt Helen shared something fascinating with me. I reportedly ran away from home with a boy when I was 18, ended up homeless, and refused to work. There was no comedy in my laughter. I'd love to hear more about this mysterious bad boy I supposedly ran away with. Mom's voice was anxious and high as she jumped in. "The past is the past, darling. Let's avoid. The day after I graduated from high school, they threw me out. The truth," I shouted, raising my voice above hers. "Are you curious as to why?" Mike shifted in his chair uneasily. Some family members gave a nod. Because I reminded them that they used our grandmother's money to pay for Mike's and my college education, as they had promised her on her deathbed. "Dad, do you recall that promise? In front of everyone, you succeeded. However, they gave Mike the remainder and used my share on an opulent trip. When I ventured to ask them about it, they threw me out." Mom muttered, "That's not true," in protest. However, I could see the relatives' eyes lit up with recognition. I earned admission to college, worked my way through it, and started my profession from nothing. And until they spotted my new apartment on Facebook, they didn't remember my birthday or call me once in 9 years. There was an overwhelming quiet in the room. My parents were the object of Aunt Helen's undisguised disdain. Uncle Bob was gently shaking his head. Taking up my purse, I remarked, "I apologize for disturbing this beautiful celebration. However, I believed that everyone should be aware of the reality." I didn't return to make amends. I returned to correct the record. The journey home was freeing. Everything was set up in my apartment, a catered meal that I had planned days in advance, fully aware of how this evening would turn out. Jenny came first, then my coworkers and real friends. We celebrated not just my birthday, but also my liberation from the lies by eating and drinking. That night, the messages began to arrive. Mom is pleading with me to change my mind. Dad stating that they were mistaken. Mike is requesting assistance with his temporary predicament. One by one, I blocked their numbers. Since I can remember, there has been a sharp and unpleasant difference in how they treated me and my younger sister, Katie. I'm Emily, and this is the tale of how I overcame being deceived by my own family. I was born a year later than Katie. She would undoubtedly be the golden child from the time she arrived. While I lurked in the background, our parents, Mark and Sarah Harrison, lavished her with love. Katie seemed to be at the center of every milestone, accomplishment, and moment. I can still clearly recall my 10th birthday. Only months prior, Katie had been treated to a grandiose party complete with bouncy castles and professional entertainers, but my celebration was limited to a cake after dinner. "We're a bit tight on money this month, Emily," Mom had mentioned. The following week, however, they were able to purchase a new iPad for Katie. The difference extended beyond tangibles. Our parents listened intently to everything Katie said throughout supper. Dad would frequently interrupt me as I tried to relate my day, saying, "That's nice, honey," as he browsed through his phone. They were crushed under the weight of their apathy. The food problem, however, was the most annoying aspect. My parents implemented a total peanut ban in our home because Katie had a severe peanut allergy, rather than handling her nutrition individually. My favorite lunch was peanut butter sandwiches, but even at school I was not permitted to eat them. "It's not fair," I recall saying to my grandmother, Rose, one afternoon as I assisted her in baking cookies. Why must I consume everything that Katie consumes? I have no allergies. Grandma Rose, the only person who accepted me for who I was my haven. Her cozy kitchen became into a haven where I could talk openly without worrying about being ignored or disregarded. She would say, "Your parents are making a mistake, sweetheart," with understanding in her wise eyes. "They think they're doing what's best, but they're not seeing how it affects you." Her familiar movements were reassuring as I watched her measure flour into a basin. Katie said that she might want to take dance lessons, so Mom got her new dancing shoes yesterday. However, Mother told me it was too costly when I sought to join the science club. Grandma Rose's expression grew stern. "Emily, I've tried discussing this with your mother. I told her only last week that she must treat you both fairly. However, Sarah," she shook her head and moaned. "She claims Katie is more talented, more outgoing, says you're too introverted, that it's harder to connect with you." Although her words were painful, they were expected. I had previously heard my parents talking about how Katie was the unique daughter with endless possibilities. I was merely there in the interim, the silent one, the one with less talent, the one they never truly saw but had to make room for. While Katie's schedule was full of art workshops, piano lessons, and dance courses, I spent my afternoons alone myself in my room, observing the world outside my window. At dinner, Mom would exclaim, "Katie has such natural talent. Her dance instructor says she could go professional someday." As I pushed my food around my plate, invisible as ever, Dad would smile proudly. But when I turned 12, everything was different. Grandma Rose showed up one Saturday morning, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Get your coat, Emily," she announced. "I've enrolled you in the Advanced Young Scientists program at the community center." That program changed my life. Suddenly, I was immersed in a world of experiments, equations, and endless possibilities. Our instructor, Dr. Chen, didn't see a quiet introvert. He saw a curious mind hungry for knowledge. When I correctly solved a complex algebra problem in my first week, he high-fived me in front of the whole class. By 14, I wasn't just excelling in science and math. I was standing at podiums, articulating arguments about climate change and social justice. People actually listened when I spoke. The shy girl who used to hide in her room was gone, replaced by someone confident, someone with opinions and the courage to express them. Emily's presentation on renewable energy was outstanding. My debate coach told my parents at a school meeting. "She has a real future in scientific research if she wants it." I'll never forget Katie's face that day, the way her smile tightened, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to sharing the spotlight, and my growing popularity at school clearly bothered her. The changes were obvious to everyone. People started stopping by my locker between classes. I was elected to the student council. Suddenly, I had friends who valued my opinions, who invited me to study groups and weekend hangouts. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when Katie started her whisper campaign. "Mom, Dad," I heard her one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I saw Emily behind the gym today. She was kissing Tommy Martinez, and last week it was Jake from her debate team." I burst into the kitchen. "That's a lie. I've never." "Katie wouldn't make this up." Mom cut me off. "She's worried about you, Emily. These boys, these late-night study sessions, it's not appropriate." But I'm just. "No more going out after 6, Dad announced, "and we'll be monitoring your phone calls from now on. It's for your own good, Emily." "What about my debate team meetings, my science club?" "You can participate in school activities," Mom said, "but afterward you come straight home. No exceptions." I looked at Katie, who was hiding a smirk behind her hand. She'd won again, and we both knew it. My newfound freedom was being stripped away, all because of her lies. As we grew up, Katie's antagonism toward me grew more pronounced. It wasn't enough for her to control my social life through our parents. She started targeting my belongings and the few friendships I'd managed to maintain despite the restrictions. One morning, I found my science project drenched in water, the careful calculations I'd spent weeks on bleeding into illegible smears. Another time, my favorite sweater, a birthday gift from Grandma Rose, mysteriously ended up with bleach stains. But the worst was what she did to my friendship with Rachel. We'd been close since middle school, bonding over our love of biology and bad reality TV shows. Rachel was one of the few friends who stuck by me despite Katie's previous rumors, but even she had her breaking point. How could you? Rachel confronted me one day at my locker, her eyes filled with tears. Katie told me everything, how you write about Matt in your diary, how you're planning to steal him from me. Rachel, that's insane. I don't even have a diary, and I've never. But Rachel was already walking away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. That evening, I cornered Katie in her room. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Why do you have to destroy everything good in my life?" "You're paranoid, Emily," she replied coolly. "Maybe if you stopped obsessing over me and making up stories, you'd have more friends." I wanted to scream. Somehow, she always managed to twist things around, making me sound like the crazy one. And our parents, they never questioned her version of events. Then came Katie's 15th birthday. Mom spent days preparing for it, determined to make it perfect. The house was decorated with pink and gold balloons, and relatives filled every corner of our living room. The cake was Mom's masterpiece, 3 tiers of vanilla buttercream, Katie's favorite. Everyone gathered around to sing Happy Birthday, and Katie blew out her candles to enthusiastic applause. But something was wrong. After a few bites, Katie's face changed. Her hand went to her throat, her eyes widening in panic. Mom recognized the signs immediately. An allergic reaction. "The EpiPen," Dad shouted, already running for Katie's emergency kit. Mom held Katie's hand while Dad administered the injection. Gradually, her breathing steadied. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly. Relatives huddled in concerned groups while my parents tried to understand what had happened. How did peanuts get in the cake? Mom kept asking, checking, and rechecking her recipe. I was so careful. That's when Katie spoke up, her voice still raspy. "I saw Emily in the kitchen earlier. She was doing something with the cake." "What?" "No," I protested. I wasn't even near the cake. But Katie pressed on. "Check her purse," she whispered, "the blue one by the door." Dad grabbed my purse before I could react. And there it was, a small jar of peanut butter, one I'd never seen before, sitting right on top of my wallet. "She could have died." Dad's voice boomed through the living room. "What were you thinking, Emily?" I stood there trembling as my parents hurled accusations at me. The jar of peanut butter in Dad's hand might as well have been a smoking gun. "I didn't do it," I repeated, my voice getting smaller each time. "Please, you have to believe me." Katie sat on the couch, an oxygen mask still near her face, but I caught the slight upturn of her lips. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching my world crumble around me. Our relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Aunt Jane pulled her daughter closer, as if I might try to poison her next. Uncle Bob wouldn't even meet my eyes. The only person who moved toward me instead of away was Grandma Rose. "Now wait just a minute," Grandma's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone needs to calm down and think about this rationally. Did anyone see Emily put it there? This needs to be properly investigated." "Everything is already clear," Dad interrupted. "Emily, go to your room. We'll deal with this later." The next few days were a nightmare. At home, my parents acted like I was invisible. They'd leave the room when I entered, lock away all the food, and whisper behind closed doors. At school, word spread quickly. People moved away when I walked down the hallways as if attempted murder was contagious. After 3 days of this torture, I couldn't take it anymore. I found Katie alone in her room, scrolling through her phone. "You need to tell them the truth," I said, closing the door behind me. "This has gone far enough." Katie looked up, and the smile she gave me was chilling. "You know what's funny?" she said, setting her phone down. "I've been planning this for months, waiting for the perfect moment. The birthday party was just perfect timing." Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt exploded. I lunged at her, grabbing her shoulders. We crashed to the floor, knocking over her bedside lamp. The noise brought our parents running. They found us wrestling on the ground, both screaming. She confessed. I shouted as Dad pulled me off Katie. She just told me she planned the whole thing. She planted the peanut butter in my purse. "Stop lying," Katie shrieked, crocodile tears already flowing. "See, she's crazy. She attacked me." "That's enough." Mom's voice was ice cold. "Pack your things, Emily. We can't have you in this house anymore." "What? No, please." "You're dangerous," Dad declared. "We'll call your grandmother. Either she picks you up by morning, or we're calling social services." I fell to my knees, begging them to listen, to understand. But their faces were stone. Katie stood behind them, and through my tears I could see her satisfied smile. Grandma arrived at dawn, her ancient station wagon idling in our driveway. As I loaded my hastily packed bags into her car, she confronted my parents one last time. "What you're doing is despicable," she told them. "You're choosing to believe a lie over your own daughter. Someday you'll realize what you've done, and it'll be too late." They didn't respond. They just stood in the doorway, Katie between them, watching as Grandma drove me away from the only home I'd ever known. Living with Grandma Rose was like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocation. Within a month, she had legally adopted me, handled all the paperwork for my transfer to Riverside High School, and converted her sewing room into my bedroom. At Riverside, nobody knew about the birthday party incident or Katie's lies. I was just the new girl with good grades and a quiet smile. Slowly, I started making friends again. Real friends this time, who didn't have Katie whispering poison in their ears. I threw myself into my studies with renewed passion. Without Katie's drama and my parents' constant criticism, I flourished. My SAE scores were nearly perfect. I graduated as valedictorian, my speech focusing on resilience and the power of second chances. My parents didn't come to the graduation ceremony. I'd sent them an invitation, more out of formality than hope, but received no response. It hurt, but less than I expected. Grandma Rose's proud tears as I accepted my diploma meant more than their absence. I'd been accepted to several prestigious medical programs, but the tuition fees were daunting. Before I could even mention student loans, Grandma Rose pulled out a folder. "I've been saving for this since you were 12, she said, showing me her college fund for me. "I always knew you were meant for great things." Those 4 years of dental school were intense but rewarding. I lived in a tiny apartment near campus, worked part-time at a cafe, and studied until my eyes burned. Through it all, Grandma Rose was my rock, listening to my excited phone calls about successful procedures and never once doubting my chosen path. I had no contact with my parents or Katie during this time. Sometimes I'd see updates about them on social media. Katie's job at a local retail store, Mom's Garden Club awards, Dad's bowling league victories. I'd scroll past them quickly, refusing to let their lives intersect with mine. Finally, after years of hard work, I held my dental license in my hands. My first job offer came from Brighton Dental Associates, one of the most respected private practices in the city. I posted a photo of my diploma and license on Facebook, adding a simple caption, "Dr. Emily Harrison, DDS, dreams do come true." The response was overwhelming. Old school friends, distant relatives, even my third-grade teacher left congratulatory comments. Aunt Jane, who'd pulled her daughter away from me at that fateful birthday party, wrote, "We're all so proud of you, Emily." Uncle Bob posted, "Incredible achievement, kiddo." Looking at those messages, I realized something profound. I'd done more than just survive my family's betrayal. I transformed it into fuel for my success. My phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The number was familiar, though I hadn't seen it flash across my screen in years. Mom. My hand shook as I debated whether to answer. "Hello," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Emily, sweetie." Mom's voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used to use when asking Katie's teachers for deadline extensions. "We saw your announcement about becoming a dentist. We're so proud of you." I said nothing, waiting. "We've been thinking about you," she continued, filling my silence. "Your father and I, well, we'd love to have you over for dinner, just to catch up as a family." I shouldn't have agreed. Every instinct told me to decline. But curiosity, or maybe that stubborn little part of me that still craved their approval, won out. "What time?" I heard myself asking. The next evening, I pulled up to my childhood home in my new Mercedes. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly around the windows. I dressed carefully, designer blouse, tailored pants, the pearl earrings Grandma Rose had given me for graduation. Armor in its own way. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Emily." She moved as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it. Come in, come in. You look so professional." Dad stood awkwardly in the living room. "Hey, kiddo." He'd aged more than I expected, his hair completely gray now, new lines around his eyes. "Is Katie joining us?" I asked, noting the table was set for 3. "Oh no, she's busy tonight," Mom said quickly. "I made your favorite pot roast." "Well, what used to be your favorite?" Dinner was a strange dance of forced smiles and careful questions. They asked about dental school, about my practice, about where I was living now. I answered politely but briefly, offering no openings for deeper conversation. "So," Dad said, pushing his potatoes around his plate, "dentistry must be lucrative." And there it was. "I do all right," I replied neutrally. "She drives a Mercedes, Mark," Mom commented, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "And you mentioned an apartment, Emily?" "Yes. I bought a place downtown. With a mortgage, of course." They exchanged glances. Mom set down her fork with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "Emily, we've been having some difficulties," she began. "Your father? Well, the company downsized last month, and my arthritis is making it harder to maintain my full schedule at the salon." "That must be tough," I said, taking a sip of water. "We were wondering," Dad cleared his throat, "that is, maybe you cold." "Have you asked Katie for help?" I interrupted. Mom's face fell. "Katie's struggling too. Retail doesn't pay much, and she's barely making ends meet as it is." "Ah." I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "Well, I'm sorry to hear about your situation, but I won't be able to help." I heard them calling after me as I walked to my car, but I didn't look back. The message from Mom came during my lunch break at the clinic. "Emily, we need $20,000. Your father and I are about to lose the house. As our daughter, you have an obligation to help us." I stared at my phone. a strange calm settling over me. Finally, an opportunity. "I'll give you the money," I typed back, on one condition. "Publicly admit on social media that I never put peanuts in Katie's birthday cake. Admit that you threw me out of the house because of Katie's lies. Tell everyone the truth." The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, after what seemed like hours, her response came through. "We can't do that. It would destroy our family's reputation in the community. People would judge us. Surely you understand." I laughed without humor. "Then you understand that I won't be giving you any money. Surely you understand." The response was immediate this time. "After everything we've done for you." I turned off my phone and went back to work. 2 hours later, during my afternoon break, I saw Katie's name light up my screen. Something made me hit the record button before answering. "Hello, Katie." "You heartless," she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "Mom's crying because of you. They're about to lose everything, and you're playing games." "I'm not playing games," I replied calmly. "I'm asking for the truth. I want them to admit what they did to me. What you did to me." "Never going to happen, sis. You know why. Because it would hurt me, and they'll never do anything to hurt their precious Katie." Her voice took on a sing-song quality. "They've always loved me more, you know. Even after I told them about the peanut butter." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Oh, didn't you know?" She laughed again, the sound chilling. "A few months after you left, I told them I planted that jar in your purse. They didn't even care. Dad just said it was probably for the best that you were gone anyway. That's how much they prefer me over you." My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "You admitted it to them." "Of course I did. I was so proud of my plan, I had to tell someone. And guess what? They didn't care." Each word was punctuated with malicious glee. "They'll never admit it publicly because it would make me look bad. So you can forget about your little confession demand." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, the recording safely saved. After all these years, I finally had proof. My sister's voice admitting to everything: the setup, the lies, our parents' willful blindness. With steady hands, I crafted the Facebook post that would change everything. No dramatics. No accusations. Just the truth finally set free. Many of you remember the incident at my sister's 15th birthday party. I wrote, "The day my parents kicked me out of their house for allegedly trying to harm my sister with peanuts. For years I've carried the weight of that false accusation. Today I'm sharing my story, not out of vengeance, but because the truth deserves to be heard." I detailed everything. The years of favoritism, Katie's escalating lies, my parents' blind devotion to her. I explained how they'd recently reached out, not to apologize, but to demand $20,000 from me. And now, I wrote, I have proof of what really happened that day. Listen to this recent conversation with my sister. I attached the audio file. Katie's voice was clear as day, bragging about planting the peanut butter in my purse, admitting that our parents knew the truth but chose to protect her anyway. The cruel laugh as she described their indifference to ruining my life. Within minutes, the post exploded. Aunt Jane wrote a lengthy apology. Uncle Bob called me directly, his voice thick with tears as he expressed his regret for believing the lies. Even my old friend Rachel reached out, finally understanding why our friendship had really ended. Then came the angry messages from my family. "Take that down immediately," Mom demanded via text. "You're destroying this family," Dad bellowed in a voicemail. Katie said, "I'll sue you for recording me without my consent." I sent the identical reply in response to each of them. Every conversation is being captured on tape and saved for future use. Copies are in the possession of my lawyer. Any harassment or threats will be handled legally. Do not get in touch with me again unless you are using the appropriate legal channels. They must have recognized at last that I was no longer that helpless adolescent girl. The messages ceased. The phone calls ceased. The harassment on social media stopped. The night after I posted, Grandma Rose arrived with a bottle of champagne. To the truth, she poured a glass for each of us. And to you, my brave girl. I fought back tears as I told her I couldn't have done any of this without you. You were the only one who believed in me when everyone else turned away. With pride shining in her eyes, she took my hand. I never had any doubts about you. And now look at you. Strong, successful, and at last devoid of their lies. Do you believe they will ever acknowledge their actions? Put an effort to put things right. Grandma Rose gave a headshake. Some people would prefer continue living their lies than confront their own reality. However, that is their burden, not yours. Of course, she was correct. Usually she is. I made my decision long ago, and Katie and my parents made theirs. Just as I've created a life for myself, they will also have to deal with the fallout from their decisions. My practice, my friends, and my relationship with Grandma Rose, the only real parent I've ever known, are my main priorities these days. I am no longer haunted by the past.